Yes, DraftScience video. Yeah, it's the Dr. Quantum thing. I know I've done it before a long time ago, but I'll do it again. Just because it sort of does point out how, wrong common perception of quantum mechanics is. And I would argue that the physicists just kind of go along with that by encouraging the idea that there's no other possible explanations and blah blah blah, and because they haven't found them, because they can't see some other explanation, the assumption is it doesn't exist, which it's kind of fallacious nonsense.
And here we are, the granddaddy of all quantum weirdness, the infamous double-slit experiment. To understand this experiment...
Okay, so to understand this experiment, right, the simplest experiment, pretty much in physics, the other ones where they have the spooky action at a distance and whatnot are a lot more complicated in terms of the moving parts. And the truth is they can't describe this simple experiment accurately or precisely even. They play with the truth aggressively, I would argue. And if they're willing to do it on a simple experiment, where you can see the exaggerations, the mischaracterizations, what are they doing with complex experiments where it's not so easy to see where they've made the assumptions, the wrong, maybe, assumptions?
We first need to see how particles, or little balls of matter, act. If we randomly shoot...
Alright, now the fact of whether they have to be little balls or little things, they're quantized pieces, bits of what you could call energy, an event. And it is in a very tiny and localized occurrence. It doesn't happen like any traditional wave ever manufactured or composed. No, there's no other kind of wave that is undistributed.
A small object, say a marble, at the screen. We see a pattern on the back wall where they went through the slit and hit.
Right, and when you're doing this with light, obviously these balls are a lot smaller than the width of the slit. The wavelength, their length, would be a lot different than their width. And so the experiment just kind of right off the bat negates any conversation about whether something goes close to the edge or away from the edge. Because even with balls, you could assume there could be a static charge if the balls were ping pong balls, for example, and this material was made of certain substances. It would be quite plausible to argue that a static charge is developed with the ping pong ball, and the ball can only fly so fast because it is a ping pong ball, and that it would be deflected by that static charge. But all of that conversation is lost in this simplification.
Now, if we add a second slit...
Now, so the assumption is that the first diagram with a single slit and the ball's going through and end up in a straight line, we know that's a wrong assumption. We know that a small slit, I should go back, but you saw it, right? It's just a single line, single line. We know that that won't happen with light. So we've known since Newton's time that if you have a narrow slit, the light's not going to go through it straight. It's not going to leave a line. So all of this, whoa, what if you add a second slit, has absolutely nothing to do with the phenomenon. The phenomenon happens with a single slit.
We'd expect to see a second band duplicated to the right.
Right, so now the assumption is first that with one slit you're going to get a band, which you don't. And now they add a second slit and now say, look, we're going to assume blah blah blah, and now we're going to be surprised. And why should you be surprised? Newton did the experiments. Newton.
Now, let's look at waves. The waves hit...
Now this is terribly, 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 terribly wrong. But okay, let's play with it. So they have a wave heading for a slit.
The slit and radiate out, striking the back wall.
Now, see, by Piro's theory, this wouldn't happen because there would be all kinds of interference because it's a single slit, it's a single wave, and Huygens is happening or something. But anyway, so no conversation about the actual mechanism that causes this bulge in a water wave. No conversation about the fact that it's the tension with the surfaces and that the wave has the water molecules cling to each other, and so they are bent by the fact that they're clinging, and they're clinging to each other, and they're clinging to the surface, and it's that tension that creates this bulging wave. Now, for light or electrons, they don't have this tension, and so what are you making the wave out of? And there's certainly the idea of friction doesn't make too much sense.
All with the most intensity directly in line with the slit.
There you go again. So is this accurate? We know that water waves distribute the intensity across the wave front. And so this doesn't happen with water waves. There's not 90% of the wave hit here and only 10% in all these other places. No, it's like there might be 10% more energy that hits this spot, but there's lots of energy going all out here. So it's nothing like this pattern. It's a complete deception, not reality.
The line of
completely inaccurate.
Brightness on the back screen shows.
And again, with waves, we have the bright spot isn't all on. It isn't a double maximum all the time. It's the most active area. It's not the lightest area. So it's again a perversion of the actual phenomenon, which is it's on, off, on, off, on, off. Yeah. I mean off by lower intensity than normal, blacker than normal.
That intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make.
See, now, is there any similarity between a water wave and its distribution of the energy and even the false representation of a band of balls going through a slit? There's absolutely nothing at all similar about those energy dynamics. This is just a complete false premise. It's just you can only call it, when you're pretending to do science, you can only call something that egregious a lie. Well, their own picture illustrates the lie. I mean, they have a bent wave and they don't have any way to demonstrate why it's bright in one spot and it's not bright in all those other spots the wave is also hitting. I mean, it was just kind of an obvious cheat of the truth.
But when we add the second slit, something different happens.
Okay, so now for all you people who have a little bit of understanding here, you know that nothing different really happens. The only thing that happens is the center maxima gets dimmer. But the pattern is exactly the same in terms of its proportions and its relationship to the frequency of the light and the width of the slit. And all that math is identically the same, except for the central maxima, which has changed, not obviously because you now have an impediment in the middle.
If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out.
Right, so there's just no explanation of how this would have anything to do with what light would do in terms of bulging. Even with a Huygens or something, there's bulging isn't a feature here. And again, the spots where there's constructive interference just means that this peak is higher and then the trough is lower. So it just means that the differential between the two is highest. Doesn't mean that this is positive, that it's all positive wave and that the other spots are negative. It just means that there will be places where there's agitation and places where the water's calm. So there's places where the water goes up and down higher than what it would be if it was a straight wave. So the normal of the straight wave is amplified in terms of the highs are higher, the lows are lower, and the dead spaces are the dead spaces. They're the neutrals.
Now, there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the two tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing.
Right, and again, simplest pattern you can have is on, off, on, off, on, off. And so the assumption is because this matches in water waves with two slits, it doesn't match with one slit, as previously demonstrated. And so therefore we can draw all kinds of conclusions about what's causing the phenomenon. I don't think so.
So, when we throw things, that is, matter, through two slits, we get
R1 slit.
this, two bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter.
Yeah, right. But it's not nearly as tiny as a photon. And it'd be better if you just played with photons because electrons don't fly straight.
Like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble. A single band.
Alright, so now, I mean, that's just proven not true. So I just mean it's just a grotesque mischaracterization of reality. They know that electrons will diffract and it will be a barred pattern. And depending on how wide you make the slit, the pattern gets more or less revealed. So if you make this slit very, very narrow, then yes, you'll only get a very weak pattern. But if you make the slit wide enough, it's, 3/4 of a millimeter or whatever. I don't know what it is for electrons, but you'll get lots of banding. So it's just a complete wrong, inaccurate, a lie. It's over 6 million views, lots of thumbs up, and it's a lie.
So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get, like the marbles, two bands. What?
Yeah, well, that's not the pattern they get either. So again, they show this, this pattern isn't even accurate. As you can see, there's two here that are the same size. They get smaller here, but there's no, these bands should be at exactly the same distances from each other. So they can't even make their graphics relevant to the truth.
Interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. But we get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles.
You get a pattern, and so again, this idea that it's like a wave, it's like the simplest on-off pattern that you can make. It's on-off.
How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave?
By being diffracted, by being deflected as they pass through the slit. So again, but there's no conversation. So just imagine these are the slits. No conversation about where the electron goes through the slit. And the fact that it might be a more complex atmosphere between these slits depending on how close they are. As we know, all things are charged, so the closer they get to each other, then the lines start going across, and there starts to be an electrical potential, and there's all kinds of electricity happening inside of matter. Matter is, just think about the fact that how it's held together. The fact that the molecules are so well bound is a demonstration that it has the potential to bind to things. And the fact that there would be some straight little edge and all the binding stops and there's no binding would be kind of not a very sophisticated assumption. Better thinkers might realize that the surface of the matter is complex and that it likely has an atmosphere.
It doesn't make sense, but physicists are clever.
Well, again, it doesn't make sense to talk about two slits when one slit does exactly the same thing, and so therefore if you're going to explain the phenomenon, you should explain it with one slit.
They thought maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they could interfere with each other.
Right, again, see, it's just, again, they just zoom right past the slits, because there's just no conversation about the fact that what would remain consistent between a stream of electrons and shooting electrons individually, what would remain consistent is what part of the slit the electron goes through, close to the wall or away from the wall. That would remain the same. So if they look at the material the electrons are passing by, they could find perhaps a solution.
But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge.
And again, it's not even the correct interference pattern. The real pattern bulges, then bulges, then bulges. It actually has the single slit pattern, and the double slit pattern is inside of the single slit proportions. So, again, more inaccuracy. It's more complicated than just on-off. It's an on-off pattern that degrades and then peaks and then degrades and then peaks again. It's an on-off pattern that goes on and off.
The conclusion is inescapable.
Now, it is escapable. That's the problem. It's really easy to escape it. You look at the slit and you say, I bet it makes a difference if the electron goes right near the edge or if the electron goes right through the middle. I bet you that could make a difference. I bet.
The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials.
Right, again, so the photons have this power and the electrons have this power. So that's with the assumption built in, that somehow this ability to create your fake radar is not only something the photons have that's coherent to the function of the photon, but then when they combine into an electron that might have 1,000,000 of these little photons in it, that thing itself can now create this same kind of coherent to its size wave and coherent to its momentum. And this is another thing that, another canard here is he's not really talking. See, light has a frequency and it's related to the width of these slits and all that kind of stuff. But he never gets into that conversation because that frequency has to do with how it will affect electrons. Electrons are affected differently by different frequencies of light. So that would give you an indication that maybe photons are hitting electrons as they're going through the slits. Now, if you're using electrons, electrons will certainly push each other. And so you can have an explanation of electrons pushing other electrons, or even just being deflected by the surface itself. But the key thing is when they talk about the electrons having a frequency, that frequency has nothing to do with how often the electrons come through, or how distant they are from each other, as it would be kind of in light. Instead, the frequency is used as a description of its momentum, or that is the velocity, how fast the electrons are moving. So now you can sort of think that if there was a static charge or there was some sort of magnetic field, the faster you push something through that field, the more likely you are to be affected by it. So you can sort of understand if something goes really fast through gravity, then it won't get caught in the gravity. If it goes really slow into a gravitational field, it'll be bent a lot by the gravity. That kind of argument. So again, that's just lost in all of this grotesque distortion and oversimplification. And I say distortion first because that's really what this is. This isn't just an oversimplification. it's a deliberate effort to bend the facts to look like something that's not true.
Through both slits and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But
yeah, to hit the wall as a quanta, okay, of discrete, complete, and I'm trying to think of a time relevant statement to make, but yeah, it happens all at once.
Mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other.
So the word superposition is used, which again, the original meaning of the word superposition really is that if you had two magnets in a location, both magnets have independent fields. The fields do not mix. And it's not until you put a piece of matter into the field that the calculation is done based on, okay, that magnet's producing this much influence, the other magnet's producing this much influence, and the math is done. But the fields themselves don't interact. And that's what superposition is supposed to mean. Now they've met it means this Heisenberg, nothing is in a location crap. Everything's more than one place at the same time. Nonsense.
But physicists were completely baffled by this.
Okay, so again, this is the story, and most of the people say the story the same way. So physicists were baffled because in the double slit experiment, Newton's rings happens. So it just baffled them that two slits made the same pattern that one slit makes. That's baffling.
So they decided to peek and see which slit.
Now, this part of this conversation, this crap never happened. They can't peek. So this whole idea they decided to peek, it was already known that you can't peek. You can't nudge an electron without nudging it. I mean, you can't influence it with anything that doesn't influence it. If you hit it with the smallest thing we know of, a photon, even a low energy photon, as they call them, energy, that is a low frequency photon that is kind of lazy and weak, which isn't true. The ton part is the same ton that's in an X-ray as in a radio wave. They're just coming, the bullets are moving with are being shot from a machine gun. It doesn't make the individual bullets less destructive. It just means there's more of them. More is not the same thing as the thing itself being weak. So there is no such thing as a weak photon. But anyway, so you hit an electron with a photon, you're going to move it. It won't go the same direction it was going. That's a known fact. So this whole mush is kind of bullshit, that there was any physicist had a theory, a rational theory, that we can observe an electron. If he had a reasonable theory that he could do that, he wouldn't be a reasonable physicist. And that's been true for hundreds of years. At least 100.
Actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit.
Now, by measuring device, that means an interfering device. It has not, it's not going to measure anything. It's just going to interfere.
See which one it went through and let it fly.
Again, so it can't see as we see. It can't look at a big giant thing and bounce photons off of it and it's all fine. We are bouncing the smallest things in the universe off each other to see each other. And we're huge. So yeah, the little photons don't mean much to our activity. But these things are the smallest things next to a photon that exists, and obviously they're going to be influenced by photons. It's like me seeing you by throwing cats at you, and watching how they bounce back. You know you're going to walk funny if I'm throwing cats at you.
But the quantum world is
Ha ha ha, it's all a big joke. Science is a joke. Let's just do cartoons that lie about science, and everybody's okay with that. The scientists can't be bothered to say, hey, that Dr. Quantum video is a piece of shit. I haven't heard one of them say it. Not one. It's the many times over more popular video than all their lectures and all their documentaries and all that crap. This is what people are being taught with, is this stupid, ignorant, inaccurate cartoon, and they can't be bothered to say something like, hey, we ought to do something about that. Because that's a lie. That's not what physicists think. We're smarter than this dumb cartoon, and they don't even do that. They're not offended.
far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble.
Again, we don't even have documentation that this was ever done. That there was any, you won't find any documented evidence that they even bothered to do this experiment. Even though it can't work, but they never even did it. There's no evidence that they did try to shoot photons at electrons to see what slit the electron went through, and then the pattern turned into a straight pattern. I can't find any documented evidence. I can't find any photographs of the photographic plates of when they turned the detector on, how the pattern changed. These things don't exist.
Produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many.
So he's saying that just two bands shows up when you turn the detectors on, and I would argue that this is feasible, that it could be that happens, but I don't think so. I mean, I don't think you're going to make all the electrons go straight no matter where they're going through, and no matter where you hit them with what photon, with how much energy, that they're all going to end up in the same place. I could see them spreading out. I could see a lot of different things happening, but I don't think there's any reason to think they all go dead straight. So until I see those images, I say this is all talk. This has nothing to do with science and experiments and telling the truth. This just has to do with talk and bullshit. This is a fucking religion.
The very act of measuring or observing
or interfering with. So the very act of interfering with something causes it to do something different. And this is physics you got to go to university for 6 years for, huh? Uh-huh.
Which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both.
Wow. Surprise, surprise. Wow, we should all be shocked. What a horror. That might be possible, that the electron actually only goes through one slit? It doesn't have magical cloning powers? And again, when it goes through the single slit, what exactly does it do? It Huygens? What's that? Huh? Its radar wave interferes with itself, and then it... Oh, never mind. But it knows not to Huygens when it hits those two slits. If it sees two slits, it says, no, you better not Huygens. Because then you'll cause 4 interference patterns.
The electron decided to act differently.
It decided. You get that part?
As though it was aware it was being watched.
So this is where it really gets into a storytelling and just, again, this is just, I'm just saying, what other subject, if there was an evolution video and it wasn't demonstrated to be just creation science, funded by some religious organization, that did this kind of a bad job on the subject of evolution, and talked about giraffes trying to reach, their necks getting longer because they were trying to make their necks longer, or some kind of crap like that. I'm sure, Dawkins types would be pretty unhappy.
And it was here that physicists stepped forever into the strange, never-world of quantum events.
Well, again, they stepped into a bunch of false premises. Like they have false premised in the past. Like they kind of got the plus and the minus wrong. And then they got the push versus pull kind of force thing wrong. And then they did this stupid wave versus particle. And again, they've chosen this silly wavy thingy. I mean, it's a wave until it hits the wall. Bullshit. Heisenberg nonsense. It doesn't know if they don't. Nothing knows where it is. It's all in nowhere and everywhere at once. Bullshit.
What is matter? Particles or waves? And waves of what?
Yes, exactly. In what? And how come they're not really waves? How can you call something that doesn't spread a wave? Just seems like rule breaking.
And what does an observer have to do with?
I mean, rational definition rule breaking. Well, the words don't really mean anything if you can conceive of this wave that just stays here.
Any of this. The observer collapsed the wave function
simply by putting an instrument in the device that spat on it a lot until it moved. Or something. Right. The observer. The interferer.
By observing.
By interfering. Okay. So I know there was more to that, but I guess they've cut some of it off or something. I don't know. But like I said, 6 million views, whatever, 10,000 likes, 1,000 dislikes, something like that. It might be 100,000 likes, I don't know. Some kind of grotesque number. And it's a cartoon. It's an insult to science. It's an insult to physics. And these people, this guy, he can't do it right either. Al-Kamari Hahari or whatever his name is. He can't tell the story accurately. He does the same thing. What a surprise! 2 slits do magical things. When, again, since Newton, they knew that 1 slit will do the same magic. And they just keep lying about that. Because they don't want to have to resort to the silly explanation of Huygens. That's, because then they'll seem pretty silly. That we just make up a fake mechanism like a god to fix the problem. We can't figure out how it happens, so we'll make a god. A fake mechanism. Fill the gap with bullshit. And that's physics, unfortunately. So anyway, I probably could add some stuff, but I guess there's no point. Stick to my agenda. So many things to work on. I've been doing some experiments, been fiddling with lasers and pointers anyway, and breaking a few. They're really made of nothing. It's just a little tiny, almost nothing. Yeah, I want to try some lenses and see if I can get a little tiny point of light. So I'm thinking fiber optics maybe. If I can get enough energy through one of these little glass fibers. It's so small, but I just don't think I can get enough light then. Not enough light. Well, see, I might be able to get enough. I'm saying I need a better camera, maybe. I actually have to use photographic film, but I have to decide what I have to come up with a strategy. In other words. But yeah, lots of stuff to work on. Got all kinds of magnetic crap here too, and blah blah blah. So I try to get to it. Yeah, and that's probably enough. I mean, the stupid Ken guy did. He made a video on magnetism. He didn't say anything again. He just keeps saying the same shit, and it's just, these aren't explanations or descriptions of anything. He's just talking bullshit. And then, well, anyway, I'll make a video about it, I suppose. I'll just, at the minimum, I'll explain why magnets have a dead line in the middle. Whatever he calls it, the perturbation of inertia or something. The, I guess a word for it. Well, anyway, the plane of something or other. Anyway, so, make a fist to take a photo. Cool. Didn't work. I did that. See my hand? Oh, that ugly callus. Didn't work. Anyway, sorry, I'm lingering for no good reason. So yeah, till next time, and such, so forth and whatnot.